What happens when one of South Africa's most controversial political figures asks a question about Jesus that even seasoned legal minds struggle to answer? In a quiet room, hidden away from cameras, microphones, and the endless noise of public debate, a conversation unfolded that would leave everyone present sitting in complete silence. It was not a political argument. It was not a media spectacle. And it was certainly not the kind of exchange anyone expected from Julius Malema. For years, Malema had been known across South Africa and beyond as a bold and outspoken political leader. His speeches often sparked headlines. His views frequently divided opinion. Admirers saw him as a fearless defender of the poor. Critics viewed him as a provocateur who challenged established institutions. Yet, in May of 2026, during a national forum on leadership ethics, social justice, and the future of South Africa, another side of Julius Malema emerged. The event was held at the Sandton Convention Center in Johannesburg. The country was facing difficult realities. Youth unemployment remained painfully high. Violent crime continued to affect communities across multiple provinces. Public trust in institutions had weakened after years of political scandals and economic struggles. Amid these challenges, questions about morality, faith, responsibility, and the role of religion in public life had become increasingly important. Among the distinguished guests attending the forum was Raymond Zondo, the former Chief Justice of South Africa. Known for his calm temperament, legal wisdom, and commitment to justice, Zondo represented a very different style of leadership from Malema. Many expected their paths to cross during the conference. Few imagined what would happen afterward. When the official sessions ended, a private meeting was quietly arranged. No journalists were invited. No cameras were permitted. Only a small group of trusted individuals entered the room. What began as a discussion about justice and ethics would soon become something far deeper. Within minutes, the conversation would turn towards suffering, faith, human responsibility, and one profound question about Jesus that would leave the entire room speechless. And as the evening unfolded, nobody could have predicted where that question would lead. As the sounds of the conference gradually faded into the evening, a smaller gathering began behind closed doors. The atmosphere was noticeably different from the formal sessions that had taken place earlier that day. There were no audiences, no applause, no prepared speeches. Only a handful of individuals seated around a table, ready for what they believed would be an informal exchange of ideas. The meeting had been requested by Julius Malema himself. Those present included Raymond Zondo, Floyd Shivambu, Pastor Themba Dlamini, and two legal advisors who had participated in the day's discussions. At first, nothing seemed unusual. The conversation began with topics that had already been discussed publicly during the conference. They spoke about justice. They spoke about leadership. They spoke about the moral challenges facing modern South Africa. Everyone in the room agreed that the nation was confronting serious problems. Communities were struggling with crime. Young people were searching for opportunities. Many citizens felt disconnected from institutions that were supposed to protect them. The discussion naturally moved toward a larger question. What role should faith play in addressing these challenges? Some argued that religious communities remained essential sources of hope and stability. Others believed faith should inspire personal responsibility while remaining separate from political power. For a while, the conversation flowed easily. There were moments of agreement. There were moments of respectful disagreement. Yet, throughout the discussion, those present noticed that Malema appeared unusually thoughtful. He listened more than he spoke. He seemed less interested in making political points and more interested in exploring deeper questions. Raymond Zondo also appeared relaxed. His years on the bench had taught him how to navigate difficult conversations with patience and composure. Whenever disagreements emerged, he responded carefully and without hostility. The atmosphere remained friendly. Coffee cups were refilled. Notes were occasionally written. No one anticipated that the discussion was about to move far beyond politics, law, or public policy. What began as a conversation about the future of South Africa was slowly becoming a conversation about the human condition itself. Questions of justice led naturally to questions of morality. Questions of morality led to questions of faith. And questions of faith would soon lead to one challenge that would completely change the tone of the evening. Those gathered around the table had expected a private discussion among leaders. Instead, they were about to witness a deeply personal debate about suffering, God, and the meaning of human existence. Before long, Julius Malema would ask a question that no one in the room could ignore. And from that moment forward, the conversation would never be the same. The central message of this first stage was simple. When people move beyond politics and begin discussing faith, justice, and human responsibility, they often discover questions far bigger than any political disagreement. The room was quiet, not uncomfortable, not tense, simply thoughtful. For several minutes, the discussion continued to move between ethics, leadership, and the challenges facing South Africa. Then Julius Malema leaned forward. The change was subtle, but everyone noticed it. His expression became more serious. His voice became slower. Instead of speaking about government policy or economic reform, he turned his attention toward something much deeper. Looking directly at Raymond Zondo, he asked a question that immediately changed the atmosphere inside the room. If God is truly all-powerful, completely good, and deeply loving, where does evil come from? The words hung in the air. Nobody spoke. Nobody interrupted. For a few moments, there was only silence. Some assumed it was a philosophical question. Others thought it might be the beginning of a theological discussion. But as Malema continued, it became clear that he was asking something far more personal. This was not an abstract debate. This was a question rooted in the realities of human suffering. He spoke about children across Africa who go to bed hungry. He spoke about families trapped fear and poverty, despite working hard every day. He spoke about wars that continue to destroy innocent lives in different parts of the world. He spoke about violent crime in South Africa and the fear that many ordinary citizens experience. Then he turned to corruption. He described how dishonest decisions made by a small number of powerful people can affect millions. He spoke about public funds disappearing while communities remain without adequate services. He spoke about the pain experienced by people who feel forgotten by those entrusted to serve them. As he spoke, the room grew even quieter. The question was no longer theoretical. It was connected to real people, real families, real tragedies. Malema was not merely asking where evil comes from. He was asking how a world filled with suffering could exist under the care of a loving God. Several people around the table began taking notes. Others simply listened. The conversation had entered territory where easy answers would not be enough. Everyone understood that questions like this have been asked throughout human history. They have been asked by scholars. They have been asked by pastors. They have been asked by judges, leaders, and ordinary people. Most importantly, they have been asked by those who have suffered. For that reason, the room treated the question with respect. No one laughed. No one dismissed it. No one attempted to change the subject. Instead, all eyes turned toward Raymond Zondo. The former Chief Justice sat quietly for a moment. He appeared to be considering not only the question itself, but also the pain behind it. Because sometimes the deepest questions are not intellectual at all. Sometimes they come from experiences that leave lasting scars. And everyone sensed that Malema's question came from exactly that place. The central message of this stage was clear. Before people can search for answers about God, they often find themselves confronting the reality of suffering, injustice, and evil in the world around them. The silence that followed Malema's question seemed to stretch across the room. No one appeared eager to speak first. The weight of the discussion had become impossible to ignore. What had begun as a conversation about ethics and leadership was now moving into some of the deepest questions human beings have ever asked. Malema was not finished. After a brief pause, he continued. His voice remained calm, but there was a noticeable intensity behind his words. He looked around the table before returning his attention to Raymond Zondo. Then he asked another question. Where is Jesus when bombs fall on innocent children? The room became even quieter. A few people shifted in their seats. Others lowered their eyes toward their notes. Nobody wanted to interrupt. Nobody wanted to rush toward an answer. Malema continued. Where is he when mothers lose their children to violence? Again, no one spoke. The question was painful because it reflected realities that many people knew all too well. Violence was not a distant concept. It was something that touched countless families across the world. Then came another question. Where is he when poor people pray every day but continue to suffer? This question seemed to affect everyone differently. Some viewed it as a challenge directed at faith itself. Others heard it as the cry of people who had spent years waiting for relief that never seemed to arrive. The discussion was no longer political. It had become deeply personal. Pastor Themba said quietly, Floyd Shivambu, listen carefully. The legal advisors who had been casually taking notes earlier were now recording nearly every sentence. The emotional temperature of the room had changed. Nobody appeared angry, yet everyone understood that they were standing at the intersection of faith and suffering. For generations, believers and skeptics alike have wrestled with the same questions. If God loves humanity, why does suffering continue? Why are innocent people harmed? Why do prayers sometimes seem unanswered? Why does evil appear to flourish while good people struggle? These questions have echoed through churches, courtrooms, hospitals, battlefields, and family homes. And now they were being asked once again in a private meeting inside a conference center in Johannesburg. What made the moment remarkable was not simply the questions themselves. It was the sincerity behind them. Malema was not speaking as a politician, delivering a speech. He appeared to be speaking as a human being, wrestling with realities he had witnessed throughout his life. Some of those present later described the atmosphere as unusually honest. There was no attempt to score points, no effort to win an argument, only a serious search for understanding. As the question settled over the room, all attention once again shifted toward Raymond Zondo. The former Chief Justice remained composed. His face revealed little emotion, but it was clear that he understood the significance of what had just been asked. The next word spoken would shape the direction of the entire conversation. The central message of this stage was simple. The deepest questions about faith often emerge not during moments of comfort, but during moments when people confront suffering, loss, and injustice that seem impossible to explain. For several moments after Malema finished speaking, nobody said a word. The room remained completely still. The questions hanging in the air were not new, but they were among the most difficult questions any believer could face. All eyes turned toward Raymond Zondo. The former Chief Justice sat quietly, his hands folded in front of him. He did not rush to answer. He did not attempt to dismiss the concerns that had been raised. Instead, he appeared to reflect carefully on every word that had been spoken. When he finally began to speak, his voice was calm and measured. He acknowledged the reality of suffering without hesitation. He did not deny that innocent people experience terrible pain. He did not pretend that poverty, violence, corruption, and loss are easy to explain. In fact, he began by saying that faith does not require people to ignore suffering. According to Zondo, One of the greatest misunderstandings about Christianity is the belief that faith promises a perfect world. He explained that the Bible never presents human history as a story free from pain. From its earliest pages, it describes a world marked by brokenness, conflict, and difficult choices. The existence of suffering, he said, is not something Scripture tries to hide. It confronts it directly. Then Zondo moved toward what he believed was the heart of the issue. He spoke about human freedom. According to the Christian understanding, God created human beings with the ability to choose. People are not machines. They are not programmed to act only in predetermined ways. They possess freedom, and with freedom comes responsibility. Zondo explained that many of the tragedies people experience are connected to how that freedom is used. Wars do not begin because weapons make decisions. People make decisions. Corruption does not appear by itself. Individuals choose dishonesty. Violence does not happen independently of human action. Someone chooses to harm another person. He paused briefly before continuing. The existence of evil is not proof against God. The room remained silent. Then he added another thought. It is often proof of how human beings misuse the freedom they have been given. The statement was neither aggressive nor defensive. It was offered as a perspective rather than a victory in debate. Several people wrote down the sentence immediately. Others simply listened. Zondo went on to explain that freedom is one of humanity's greatest gifts, but it is also one of humanity's greatest responsibilities. Without freedom, genuine love would not exist. Neither would moral courage, compassion, sacrifice, or justice. Yet the same freedom that allows people to do good also allows them to choose evil. According to his view, much of the suffering in the world grows out of that reality. The room remained thoughtful. Nobody interrupted. Even Malema appeared focused on every word. Yet it was clear that the discussion was far from over. Because if God grants freedom while knowing how people will use it, another difficult question naturally follows. And before long, Malema would raise exactly that challenge. The central message of this stage was clear. Faith does not deny the existence of suffering. Instead, it often points to human freedom and human responsibility as central parts of understanding why so much suffering exists in the world. For a brief moment after Raymond Zondo finished speaking, the room seemed to relax. His explanation had been thoughtful. It had addressed the role of human freedom and responsibility. Several people nodded quietly as they reflected on his words. But Julius Malema was not yet satisfied. He had listened carefully. He had allowed Zondo to finish without interruption. And now he was ready with another question. Leaning slightly forward, he spoke with the same calm intensity that had characterized the conversation from the beginning. If God knew all of this would happen, he asked, why did he allow it to happen anyway? The room immediately became tense again. Everyone understood the significance of the challenge. Malema was no longer questioning human behavior. He was questioning divine responsibility. If God is all-knowing, then surely he knew that people would commit terrible acts. If God is all-powerful, then surely he could prevent those acts. If God is loving, then why permit so much suffering to unfold across generations? The question touched the very center of one of history's oldest debates. Several people exchanged brief glances. Others returned to their notebooks. The discussion had moved beyond practical matters and into territory where philosophy, theology, and personal experience intersected. Malema continued. He spoke about fairness. What does justice mean if innocent people suffer while others prosper? He spoke about the meaning of pain. Can suffering serve any purpose when it destroys lives and breaks families? Then he raised another issue, the silence of God. For many people, he said, the greatest struggle is not simply suffering itself. It is the feeling that heaven remains silent while suffering takes place. People pray, people hope, people wait. Yet sometimes answers seem distant. Sometimes relief does not come when expected. Sometimes tragedy arrives despite sincere faith. These realities, Malema suggested, leave many people wondering whether anyone is truly listening. The room remained remarkably focused. No one checked the phone. No one attempted to steer the discussion elsewhere. The conversation had become too important. Pastor Themba listened with folded hands. Floyd Shivambu sat quietly, his attention fixed on the exchange. The legal advisors continued writing, determined not to miss a single detail. What made the moment powerful was not hostility. There was no shouting, no personal attacks. Instead, there was an honest confrontation with questions that millions of people quietly carry in their hearts. Questions often asked beside hospital beds. Questions whispered during funerals. Questions spoken during lonely nights when suffering appears to have no explanation. Even those who disagreed with Malema could understand why such questions mattered, because they were not merely intellectual. They were deeply human. And as the tension in the room continued to build, everyone sensed that the discussion was approaching a turning point. The next response would need to address not only theology, but also the emotional reality behind the questions. At that moment, an unexpected voice prepared to enter the conversation, and that voice would change its direction completely. The central message of this stage was simple. The hardest questions about faith often emerge when people struggle to understand why suffering exists and why God sometimes appears silent in the face of human pain. The room remained silent after Malema's challenge. No one seemed eager to speak immediately. The questions that had been raised were too important, too personal, and too complex for quick answers. For several seconds, the only sound was the faint hum of the air conditioning. Then, unexpectedly, Pastor Themba Dlamini leaned forward. Until that moment, he had mostly listened. He had allowed the discussion to unfold between Malema and Zondo without interruption. But now he felt compelled to contribute. His voice was calm. There was no trace of confrontation in his tone. Instead, he spoke as someone reflecting on a question that had occupied human hearts for centuries. Perhaps, he said quietly, we are searching for a God whose primary purpose is to solve every problem for us. The statement immediately captured the attention of everyone in the room. Pastor Themba continued. He explained that many people expect faith to function like a shield against every hardship. They hope that belief will remove pain, eliminate uncertainty, and prevent tragedy from entering their lives. Yet, he argued, that has never been the central message of Christianity. Faith does not erase suffering. Faith helps people endure suffering. The distinction was important. According to Pastor Themba, the Christian story is not built around the absence of pain. It is built around God's presence within pain. Then he pointed to the example at the center of the Christian faith, Jesus himself. If suffering were proof that God had abandoned humanity, Pastor Themba suggested, then the cross would make little sense. The life of Jesus included rejection. It included betrayal. It included humiliation. And ultimately, it included immense suffering. Yet Christians believe that those painful events became part of a greater story of redemption and hope. The pastor was careful not to suggest that suffering is good, nor did he imply that people should simply accept injustice. Instead, he emphasized that faith provides strength when suffering cannot immediately be removed. It offers courage during uncertainty. It offers hope when circumstances appear hopeless. As he spoke, the atmosphere in the room began to change. The conversation was becoming less theoretical, less philosophical, more personal. Everyone present had experienced hardship in one form or another. Everyone understood loss. Everyone carried wounds that others could not see. The discussion was no longer focused only on what people believe about God. It was beginning to explore how those beliefs shape their response to suffering. For the first time that evening, the conversation felt deeply human rather than purely intellectual. Even Malema appeared reflective. He listened carefully. He did not interrupt. He did not immediately challenge the pastor's argument. Instead, he seemed to be weighing the words against experiences from his own life. And soon, those experiences would become part of the discussion. Because what happened next surprised nearly everyone in the room. For the first time during the meeting, Julius Malema would speak not as a political leader, but as a man reflecting on the struggles that had shaped him. The central message of this stage was clear. Faith does not necessarily remove suffering from life, but many believers see it as a source of strength, hope, and endurance while facing suffering. After Pastor Themba finished speaking, the room fell quiet once again, but this silence felt different. The atmosphere was no longer dominated by debate. Instead, it carried a sense of reflection. For much of the evening, Julius Malema had asked difficult questions. He had challenged assumptions. He had pushed the discussion into uncomfortable territory. Yet now, for the first time, his attention seemed to turn inward. He sat quietly for several moments before speaking. When he finally began, his voice was noticeably softer than before. The change was subtle, but everyone in the room noticed it. What followed surprised nearly everyone present. Instead of presenting another argument, Malema began speaking about his own life. He spoke about growing up in poverty. He described the uncertainty that often accompanies childhood in communities where opportunities are limited. He spoke about watching people struggle simply to meet basic needs. He recalled moments when hardship seemed to be a constant companion rather than a temporary challenge. There was no dramatic performance in his words, no attempt to gain sympathy. He simply described experiences that had shaped the way he viewed the world. Then he spoke about loss. He reflected on painful moments within his family, moments that left lasting questions in his heart, questions that did not disappear simply because he became successful or influential later in life. As he continued, the room remained completely focused. Even those who knew Malema well appeared surprised by the openness of his remarks. Public figures often reveal their opinions. Much less often do they reveal their wounds. He then spoke about witnessing injustice, not as a political concept, not as an academic subject, but as something he had seen with his own eyes. He described situations where hardworking people remained trapped in poverty. He described communities waiting years for improvements that never seemed to arrive. He described individuals who felt invisible to those in positions of power. For Malema, these experiences were not distant observations. They were part of his personal story, and they had left him carrying questions that remained unresolved. Then came a statement that seemed to affect everyone in the room. For a moment, he paused. His eyes moved across the table, and then he said quietly, "Sometimes I wonder whether God truly hears the poor." The sentence landed with extraordinary weight. No one interrupted. No one rushed to respond. The words were not spoken as an accusation. They sounded more like a confession, a question that had lived in his heart for many years. For some people, faith grows stronger through suffering. For others, suffering creates questions that never fully disappear. In that moment, Malema appeared to be giving voice to those questions, not only for himself, but for countless people who have stood in difficult circumstances and wondered whether their prayers were reaching heaven. The discussion had now moved far beyond theology. It had become personal, deeply personal, and everyone sensed that the conversation was approaching its most important moment. because Raymond Zondo had listened carefully to every word. And the response he was about to give would leave the entire room in silence. The central message of this stage was simple. Behind many questions about God are personal experiences of hardship, loss, and injustice that shape how people understand faith and suffering. The room remained silent after Malema spoke. No one seemed willing to break the moment. His final question lingered in the air. Sometimes I wonder whether God truly hears the poor. It was no longer a political statement. It was no longer part of a debate. It was the honest reflection of a man speaking from experience. For several seconds, Raymond Zondo said nothing. He simply looked at Malema, not with disagreement, not with judgment, but with the calm attention that had characterized him throughout the evening. Those present would later remember that pause. It was not awkward. It was thoughtful, as if Zondo understood that some questions deserve reflection before they receive a response. Finally, he spoke. His voice was quiet, measured, deliberate. Perhaps, he said, the biggest question is not where God is. The room became even stiller. Everyone listened. Zondo paused again. Then he continued. Perhaps the greater question is where we are when others are suffering. The words landed with remarkable force. No one had expected that answer. For a moment, nobody moved. Nobody reached for a notebook. Nobody attempted to respond. The entire room seemed frozen in reflection. The statement shifted the focus of the conversation completely. For hours, the discussion had centered on God's role in human suffering. Now Zondo was directing attention toward humanity's role. Where are we when children go hungry? Where are we when families struggle? Where are we when corruption steals opportunities from the poor? Where are we when violence destroys communities? Where are we when our neighbors cry for help? The questions were not spoken aloud, yet everyone in the room could feel them. Zondo continued carefully. He explained that many people ask why God does not act, but sometimes the more uncomfortable question is whether human beings are acting. After all, societies are built by people. Communities are shaped by people. Governments are led by people. Institutions are managed by people. The same freedom discussed earlier in the evening carries responsibilities. If human beings possess the ability to help, protect, serve, and uplift others, then their choices matter profoundly. The room remained completely silent. Even Malema did not respond immediately. Several people later admitted that this was the moment that affected them most deeply. Not because it answered every theological question. It did not. Not because it solved the mystery of suffering. It did not. But because it redirected the conversation from blame to responsibility, from abstract philosophy to practical compassion, from asking what others should do to asking what each person can do. Pastor Themba lowered his eyes thoughtfully. Floyd Shivambu sat motionless. The legal advisors stopped writing for a moment and simply reflected. No one appeared interested in winning an argument anymore. The discussion had become something else, a shared examination of conscience. And in that silence, everyone present seemed to understand that some truths are not shouted. They are quietly recognized. The central message of this stage was clear. While people may continue asking where God is during times of suffering, they must also ask where they themselves are and what responsibility they bear toward those who are hurting around them. After Zondo's final remarks, the conversation entered a different phase. The energy that had fueled the debate gradually gave way to quiet reflection. No one appeared interested in scoring points. No one seemed concerned with proving themselves right. For nearly 2 hours, some of the most difficult questions about faith, justice, suffering, and human responsibility had been placed openly on the table. Yet, remarkably, there was still a sense of mutual respect. The participants understood that they had not gathered to defeat one another. They had gathered to seek understanding. As the evening moved toward its conclusion, the discussion became less about answers and more about reflection. The room remained calm, thoughtful, almost contemplative. No final verdict was reached. No declaration of victory was made. No participant claimed to have solved the mysteries that humanity has wrestled with for centuries. Instead, everyone seemed to recognize that some questions are larger than any single individual. Questions about suffering, questions about justice, questions about faith, questions about the responsibilities that accompany freedom. What made the evening memorable was not the discovery of a perfect answer. It was the willingness of everyone present to engage honestly with difficult truths. Several participants later agreed that what had taken place was never really a political discussion. Politics may have brought the individuals together, but the conversation had traveled far beyond political boundaries. It had become a dialogue about conscience, a dialogue about compassion, a dialogue about what it means to be human in a world where suffering exists. As the meeting finally came to an end, chairs were pushed back from the table. Notebooks were closed. Coffee cups were gathered. The evening that had begun as a private exchange between prominent figures was now drawing to a close. Then came one final image that remained in the minds of those present. Before leaving the room, Julius Malema and Raymond Zondo stood and shook hands. There was no dramatic statement, no press conference waiting outside, no cameras recording the moment. Just two men who had spent hours discussing some of life's deepest questions. No one could know exactly what had changed in their thinking. Perhaps some views remained the same. Perhaps others had evolved. Only they could truly know. But everyone who witnessed the exchange carried away one question that continued to echo long after the meeting ended. If God has given humanity the freedom to choose, then could it be that many of the answers we seek begin not with heaven, but with the choices we make toward one another every day? That question followed them out of the room. And for many, it remained far more powerful than any argument that had been spoken that evening. The central message of this final stage was simple. The most meaningful conversations are not always the ones that produce clear winners. Sometimes they are the ones that leave people thinking more deeply about faith, justice, responsibility, and the role each person plays in shaping the world around them. As the lights of the Sandton Convention Center faded into the Johannesburg night, the conversation that had taken place behind closed doors continued to resonate far beyond that meeting room. No headlines captured every word. No cameras preserved every moment. Yet for those who were present, the discussion left a lasting impression. What began as a private exchange between Julius Malema and Raymond Zondo evolved into something much larger. It became a reflection on faith, a reflection on justice, a reflection on suffering, and perhaps most importantly, a reflection on human responsibility. Throughout the evening, difficult questions were asked. Questions that people across every nation, culture, and generation have wrestled with for centuries. Why does suffering exist? Why do innocent people endure hardship? Where is God when tragedy strikes? And what responsibility do human beings carry in a world marked by pain and inequality? No final answer settled every debate. No single statement removed every doubt. But perhaps that was never the purpose. Sometimes the most valuable conversations are not those that provide certainty. They are the ones that inspire deeper reflection. The truth is that people everywhere seek many of the same things. Whether they live in Africa, America, or anywhere else in the world, they seek dignity. They seek justice. They seek truth. And they seek hope. History repeatedly reminds us that no nation can truly become strong while large numbers of its people remain trapped in poverty, injustice, fear, or hopelessness. Lasting change cannot be built solely through policies, institutions, or political victories. Those things matter. But genuine transformation begins within the human heart. It begins when individuals choose compassion over indifference, integrity over corruption, service over selfishness, truth over convenience. The future that so many people long for will not be created by one leader alone. It will require unity. It will require courage. It will require kindness. And it will require a shared commitment to seeking what is right, even when doing so is difficult. Perhaps that is why the final question from that evening remains so powerful. If human beings possess the freedom to choose, then what will they choose to do with that freedom? Will they ignore the suffering around them? Or will they become part of the answer? The hope for a better future belongs not merely to those who dream about change, but to those who act to create it. And now we would love to hear from you. What do you think about the questions raised during this remarkable conversation? Do you agree with Malema's concerns, Zondo's response, or perhaps both? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Join the conversation respectfully and help continue the search for truth, justice, faith, and hope in a world that needs them more than ever.